Speaking of observations, let's go ahead and take a look at the internet weather for the last week or so here. And the first item we have is scan sources and probes. We happen to be showing sources in the graph here, but it's scan sources and probes on port 53413 UDP. That's a rather obscure port, not one that most of us would recognize, but it actually turns out that this is associated with a backdoor that's located in a particular brand of home routers. This is one's made by Netcore and marketed under the Netis brand name, N-E-T-I-S. The scanning activity in earnest kind of began right around a disclosure that was made around August 25th, and we'll go ahead and take a look at this in a moment here. But you can see actually right around August 27th, there are actually little bumps of scanning activity on this particular port. But what we're seeing here is actually a significant growth in that activity. This was actually right around, I guess, September 1st. This was actually a growth in the number of sources that are doing the scanning activity. So it went up to about 700 here, and then we see that sort of typical pattern of decay associated with botnet activity. And then they renewed it again. What we saw were about 1,400 sources doing that scanning activity. It's resumed that decay activity. And so this, 1,400 we saw just yesterday, September 8th. The significance here is that there is botnet activity scanning for this particular port, and it's associated with a backdoor. And to give you a little better idea what the characteristics of this backdoor are, as I've mentioned, it's in this Netis home router device, and it turns out that what was discovered here by Trend Micro on their blog is a hard-coded password in the firmware. So in order to be able to change this, you're going to have to get a patch or an update to the firmware itself. And it allows installation of malware as well as configuration or control of the router itself. So effectively, you can do just about anything you want with the device. Now, most of these devices apparently are, it's a most popular device in China. There are fewer devices, and this is based on the Trend Micro observations. They see other ones and not so many. They did some scanning activity apparently in South Korea, Taiwan, Israel, and the United States. What we see in the scanning activity is relatively consistent with what they're saying, most of them in China, but we also saw some in Turkey, Brazil, Mexico, and some other countries actually in Eastern Europe. So it's relatively global in activity, not particularly significant in the United States. I'm not sure why the United States is kind of left out of this in terms of large volumes, but there are some around. So in any case, you want to pay attention to these routers. It's just yet another example of the Internet of Things that are contributing to our security issues as we go forward, and we're going to need to continue to push the industry to improve the security of these devices. Next item here is scan sources and probes on port 49152 TCP. This is one that we've talked about actually at least a couple of times now. This is associated with the IPMI vulnerability on Supermicro motherboards, where you could go in and actually extract a clear text password associated with that service. In this case, again, the sources appear to be Internet of Insecure Things. And John, you've done a little bit of investigation into this. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I mean, what I can add is they're definitely scanning for that particular vulnerability in the Supermicro IPMI. It's a particular get URL that you just got to fetch, and it gives you the whole password list. That's a pretty bad vulnerability. So they're definitely scanning for that, but in terms of the sources doing it, there's a lot of embedded devices. I was anticipating that I would find Supermicro IPMI devices participating in this botnet that's doing the scanning. I wasn't able to find any that were. But I didn't do an exhaustive search either through our scan source pool here. I just kind of did a little statistical analysis. Most of them are these, like I said before, security camera DVRs, other network attached storage devices, these other types of embedded devices, home routers that have like a telnet prompt or whatever that you can get into. So that seems to be the pool set of the types of scan sources that are involved here. Now, what someone's doing with the devices that are vulnerable is, the Supermicro IPMI vulnerable devices, I don't know. I haven't been able to see them participating in any kind of botnet yet.
Okay.
They might be, and I don't see it.
Right, okay. So I guess in terms of preventative or fixes associated with this, I did a little bit of research, but not what I would describe as extensive or exhaustive research. I have not found any strong evidence of even acknowledgement of this vulnerability by Supermicro, let alone patches associated with that. They do provide firmware patches for IPMI associated with their motherboards, particularly associated with security vulnerabilities. There were some that were described back in December of 2013, but it is not clear that they actually have a patch for this. So if you have a Supermicro device, you're going to want to go out and check on that. It's not something that's going to get updated by itself. You're going to have to do the firmware patches associated with it. And I guess the other thing, and perhaps obvious to a lot of folks here, there is actually a best practices document for BMC. This is baseboard management console capabilities, and basically what they say is you should be firewalling off these capabilities. They say firewall it off from the internet. My personal recommendation is firewall it off from anybody that's not having to manage these devices directly. So actually, control it based on an operations center would be the ideal approach to it. And so in any case, this is, I think, a problem that's not going to go away anytime soon. These firmware updates generally aren't done until somebody really has to get pressed into it. And similarly speaking, the same thing with the Netis router item previously. It looks like in order for that problem to go away, you really have to do the firmware updates, and it's not likely a lot of those folks are going to do it anytime soon. So these are just some things that we're going to have to be paying attention to on the network, and seeing what we can do to prevent the troubles that they're potentially creating. Next item here is scan probes on port 5666 TCP. This is a port that's associated with Nagios, which is basically a low-cost system management platform to be able to gather information about the state of systems and to help to manage those systems. Most of these probes are from a single address, and it's actually a US-based web advertising company, which I found to be a little bit of an anomaly here, perhaps a compromise of some sort of a piece of equipment they have exposed to the internet. Hopefully it's not one of these Nagios management devices of their own, but in any case, we're seeing some of that probing activity. We'll want to keep an eye on that. Again, anything that you have, whether it's IPMI or other management platform, you want to keep those things firewalled off from the internet. Next item here is bytes on source port 161 UDP. That's a simple network management protocol, one that's notoriously associated with distributed reflection denial of service attacks, and that appears to be the case here, that we're seeing some denial of service attack activity. Of course, looking at the graph here, you can see that that's not new. You can see some sort of definite campaign activities that are going on here, and some of the recent things sort of set off some alarms associated with that. A lot of these attacks are generally targeting consumers. There are multiple attacks going on at a time, and I would generally associate that with the commercialized denial of service attack services, often referred to as booters or stressor services. So there really needs to be some work done to try to reduce that opportunity for commercialized denial of service attacks. They're getting awful cheap and actually competitive. Looking at the 10 most probed ports, no real significant changes here. There's one that's probably notable, port 25 TCP, that showed up. It actually moved up 15 notches in terms of the rankings. It was previously, in the previous week, ranked 24, but moved up to number 9 here. Just going through the list, port 22 TCP, we've talked about many times. This is basically brute force password attack attempts, as is port 23. Brute force password attack attempts to try to get remote access into devices, oftentimes devices that we tend not to think of as computers, Internet of Things. Next port is 1433, that's Microsoft SQL database, generally password guessing attacks associated with that as well, followed by port 445, port 80, port 53 UDP, DNS, port 3389, which is remote desktop protocol, and then followed by port 25 TCP. That's simple mail transfer protocol, so that's basically what's used to send email, and then port 8080 TCP. Oh, and I guess I wanted to show you a little bit about what it looks like, that profile associated with the port 25. What we see here is, and that pie chart, by the way, is from previous day activity. This was September 8th. What we're seeing here is actually a surge in scanning activity that took place. Most of that probing activity, that scanning activity, came from a source in China. There are a number of sources that do probing activity on port 25. They may be looking for open SMTP icmp relays that would be able to facilitate spamming activities, and I'm sure there are plenty of those out there. They generally get shut down pretty fast because there are pretty good, operations associated with basically rejecting sources of email that are invalid, but that continues to happen, and they're able to get some through. And so something you also want to be paying attention to on systems, make sure you don't have port 25 open if it's not supposed to. Next and last here, we have the most sources doing the probing. And on the top 10 list here, we have port 445 TCP, followed by port 23 TCP, port 80, port 8080 TCP, and then 2715, which generally is not associated with any security issues. It's generally associated with gaming. Port 8081 with a proxy interface, as well as port 3128, which is a squid proxy. So a lot of probing activity tends to be looking for these proxies that potentially could be used to anonymize activity on the internet.